Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm James, continuing on with my Balsa USA Stingray 120 build. In the last 3 videos of this build series, I installed the servos. I installed the servos for the engine, which was the choke and the throttle servo. I installed the servos for the tail section, and I also installed the servos for the wing. So check those out if you're interested. But in this video, I'm getting back to the engine, and I'm going to be installing the fuel tubing from the engine itself, obviously, to the fuel tank. And I also have a desert aircraft fuel dot that I'm going to be using. So once again, I'd like to mention I'm using the DLE-20 RC rear exhaust gas engine to power the airplane. So before I put all this stuff into the plane, I thought I would go over the different parts. So let's go ahead and start with the fuel tank. So in an earlier video, I installed the fuel tank and I constructed a mounting plate for it, and then I attached it using Velcro. So check out that video if you're interested in that. But I pulled it out so we can take a closer look at the tank itself. So again, this is a Valley View RC gas tank. This is not for glow fuel, it's for gas. And you see it's actually a really nicely constructed gas tank. It's very strong, very sturdy connections. And one thing that's very nice about it is it's already assembled for you, so you don't have to put it together. So let's go ahead and look at a few of the different kind of features. So the main cap here, which is screwed on, is a solid piece. It's aluminum, it's not plastic. And again, it's one solid piece, so you're not going to have any problems with leakage where the line comes out. And then on the inside, it has an O-ring for the seal. You can kind of see that right there. And then it's connected with a clip. There's our Tygon fuel tubing, and it connects to this felt clunk. And the clunk, the felt is just basically, well, it is a filter for your gas, so that's a very nice feature. And it just screws on here nicely. And then let's take a look at the other two fittings. So this one up here is your vent line, and the vent line will have a line coming off this. It's going to loop around and then exit the plane in the bottom. And the reason we're going to loop it around, I'll go over that, but that's basically when the plane goes inverted, you don't want the fuel to leak out. And by having a long sort of path for the fuel to have to go, by looping it around like that, it makes the path of the fuel longer, and that will hopefully minimize any leaking coming out of the tank itself. So, and again, I'll set that up and you'll see how that works. Then on this side, we have this fitting, which is the fuel, to fill it, and also to remove the fuel. And obviously it goes all the way down to the bottom of the tank here. It's a solid aluminum little pipe, I guess. And again, it's not, you know, a lot of the other tanks you have, the fill line is just coming off of the cap like this one. It's just a flexible line, and they're flopping around, kind of getting in the way. But this is nice over here. It's sort of isolated, and again, it's nice and solid, and it's aluminum. If you look at it closely, it actually kind of flops up and down. And I'm not sure exactly why they've constructed it that way, but you know, I guess that's needed. And then at the bottom of it, you see there's like a little groove kind of cut into the bottom of it there. So even when it does go all the way down, you're not going to seal it off. So that really, by the fact that it can just kind of pop down like that, it really allows you to be able to get all the fuel out when you need to, when you're emptying the tank. Okay, so again, that's the Valley View RC fuel tank that I'm going to be using. Next, let's go ahead and take a look at the fuel dot I got from, again, Desert Aircraft, and pull it out of the bag here, the different parts. So this is a really well constructed fuel dot. It's all aluminum, solid. And so of course here's the housing, which is going to be, we're going to drill this a hole out in the fuselage. We'll plug this in, and then on the other side of on the inside, they have this ring here made out of plywood. That'll, again, so we'll sandwich the side of the fuselage like that, and then it gets installed with these little screws. Now, interestingly, these are like machine screws. They're not wood screws, and they give you plywood. So I'm not really sure. It's kind of sort of strange. I'm not sure why they didn't just give you wood screws for this, but this is how it came, and it looks like it's pretty well constructed and it's pretty popular, so I'm sure it will work fine. So once that's installed in the plane, of course, we have the actual plug itself, and the fuel line will attach to that. And of course, the fuel line is going to go right through the back, and it will attach to our plug here, and this will just be pushed right in to the fuel dot. It's got a little O-ring on it for the seal. Actually, it's really just to hold it in. It's not really a seal for anything. And it's pretty stiff right now, so we got to push it in. Actually, you can kind of see how stiff it is to get it in there. Over time, I imagine it's going to loosen up a little bit. And then it's got these little, push it in there, and it's got these little indents on both sides, so you can kind of get in there and pull it out. There's no way I can pull this out with my fingers, with my fingernails, so I'm going to have to use a screwdriver when I'm out in the field flying it. And again, it's going to loosen up over time, so I'm not too concerned about that. But it is pretty stiff, which is it's a good thing. You know, you don't want it flopping out of there. That's the whole point. But yeah, so this is a very nicely constructed fuel dot that we're going to be using. Okay, then here's our fuel line. This is the of course Tygon fuel line for gas. I have a piece of it here, and the size of this is, what I'm using is an 1/8 inch diameter, inside diameter. Just got it right here. You can kind of see. Now the thing about Tygon fuel and fuel line, I mean, and if you're not familiar with this, the difference between Tygon fuel and your glow fuel line, which is made out of silicone, is that the glow fuel line is very flexible. It's silicone, like I said, and it's very easy to kind of get it over your different fittings. I noticed with this stuff, it's pretty stiff, and it's pretty hard to get it on over the fittings. It's pretty tough to get those on. That's another reason why I took the tank out, because it was down inside the fuselage, and it would be really hard for me to kind of get this working down inside the plane to get these lines on. Because what's interesting about the tank itself, the only issue I have with it is that the fitting coming off of the main line, you can see the size of it's actually smaller than the ones coming off these two fittings up here. And kind of doing a little test run with it. This one goes on fairly easy, but these ones back here, they're very hard to get this tubing over the top of those. Now, I guess, and I think this is one of the larger size tubing. I'm sure you can get larger size tubing, but it has to also match the engine and everything else. So I'm going to just go ahead and just kind of get it on here, probably use some kind of maybe soapy water or something to slip it on. But it is a little more difficult to get tubing on over these bigger fittings back here. And again, this one's not too bad. So anyhow, this is the Tygon fuel tubing. I bought a bunch of this, and we'll cut my lengths and we'll get that all set up. Well, before I start putting everything in, I thought I'd show one more thing, which is the diagram in the manual for the fuel line setup. So again, this is I have a nice folder here where I keep all my different manuals for engines and such that I have. There's some Sato stuff back here. Yeah, in any case, so let's go ahead and open up the manual to the page that has the fuel. There it is, the fuel line on it, fuel line setup. So the manual shows two setups. It shows a 2-line setup and a 3-line setup. I'm going with the 3-line setup. Now the big difference between this diagram is looking at the tank itself. So again, there's a 3-line setup, but in this one they have all the lines going through the main cap here. So we have the main carburetor line, this guy right here, we have the vent line, and then we have the fuel fill line with the plug shown right here. Again, it's just a schematic, it's nothing of great detail, but compare it with the setup I'm using with my tank. As I mentioned, I have a single line going through the cap here, and then we have our vent and our filling lines separately on top of the tank here. So that's the big difference. It all works the same, but I just wanted to point that out. So I need to mention this vent line. So you notice in the diagram, it comes out of the tank, it loops back to the rear of the tank, then it comes back to the forward, and then it goes out of the fuselage, the lower part of the fuselage. The reason this setup is like this isn't because we want to waste a bunch of fuel line. It's because this is just a vent line. It's not a pressurized line. So what would happen is you could, when you're flying inverted, for example, fuel, if this line was just a short line coming out of your tank, fuel could drain out of your tank, and then that would not be good. So by putting this long length in here, the fuel has to travel, to the back of the tank and then to the forward of the tank, and by that time that happens, you're probably not flying, the things have changed in your flight pattern, so then the fuel will just drain back into the tank. So the key thing here is that, now if you've been flying gas engines, you're familiar with gas engines, I know you know this already, so I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But for a glow engine setup, we always have a pressure line coming off of the muffler. So the vent line, which is shown here on a glow engine setup, acts also as a pressurized line. When you're filling the tank up when you're setting up a glow engine RC plane, when you're filling the tank, it's acting as a vent line, because you're filling the tank up and the fuel is filling the tank, and then that just unpressurizing the tank. It's actually just venting the tank. But then when you start the engine up, because that line is connected to the muffler, that then repressurizes the tank, or pressurizes the tank, so that we can push the fuel to the carburetor. In a gas engine setup, we have a pump inside of the carburetor, so we do not need a pressure line coming off of the muffler. So again, here in this setup, this is just simply a vent, and by making this very long kind of path for the fuel to have to travel, if it does leak out of here, you're minimizing the chances of fuel leaking out over onto your airplane or other places. Okay, well, to start with, I'm going to install my fuel dot, and I have my parts in this little tray here, and I'm going to put it right about here on the right side of my fuselage, somewhere right in this area, because for me, the way it's set up for me at the flying field and everything, I typically have all my equipment on the right side of my airplane, so this is the best place for me to be fueling up, is from the right side of my airplane. So it's going to go here, and then I wanted to show you inside the fuselage where it's going to be poking through, and hopefully the camera can get in here without getting too blurry. But yeah, so right down, you zoom in here a little bit better, right down here in this spot is where it's going to come through, and I have to make sure, obviously, to avoid the doublers, the plywood doubler that's on the side of the fuselage. So I made some initial measurements to make sure I get it in the right spot, and then, as I said, I will put it right about here. All right, so I'm just going to use the wood to plywood backing for the mount as sort of a template of where I need to put my access hole. And what I've done is I've already measured from the firewall and from the bottom of the plane to approximately where this has to go. So I know my firewall is right about here, and what I measured previously was about 1.5 inches. It's not perfect, but 1.5 inches or so. And that's going to be the edge of basically the edge of this backing here, so that it avoids the firewall, and then again, like I said, the doubler, and then the reinforcements and stuff that are in there. And then I'm going to have to be 1.5 inches up from the bottom, which is somewhere right about here, because again, I have that plywood doubler like right in here. So actually, now that I have that, I'm just going to bring this up approximately where my line is, and then kind of going off the bottom here. I know I'll be right about, because it's angled, I know that this guy is going to sit right about there. Okay, pretty simple. And then, as I've mentioned before, this stuff just comes off with acetone, I think maybe even alcohol. This is just a Sharpie. So this is going to be where it goes, right about there. And I'll just go ahead and I'll trace that inner hole. And there we go. Okay, well, I went back and I checked this location, which I always do before I cut. I check it, you know, like they say, you know, check twice, cut once. Is that what people say? Something like that. But I realized that this actually looks like it's just barely to where I need it. And I want to give myself a little bit of working room. I don't want to screw up here. So I'm just going to go ahead and move this over. I got the correct kind of height, but I'm just going to go ahead and move this over. I'm just going to move it over about that much, not too far. Just move it over. I've got room, so I might as well use it. All right, so I'm going to go right about there. Not as pretty, but it'll work. Okay, so now I'm ready to go ahead and cut this access hole. You know, obviously, I hope it's obvious, I'm not going to use a giant drill bit for this, because that would just be ugly. It would just tear this thing to pieces. So I could actually cut it out with an X-Acto blade. This is just balsa, so I can cut it out with an X-Acto blade and it wouldn't be a big deal. Or I can use this method, which I like. I call it the sewing machine method. Basically, I'm just going to hit it all the way around with a bunch of small holes, and then we'll just pop it out, and then I'll fit this in. And the thing about this is it doesn't have to be perfect, because it's going to be mounted with the screws. It's not being mounted anywhere around here, so obviously you want it to be nice and snug, but it doesn't have to be perfect. And now it's soft balsa, so I can clean it up with an X-Acto blade. I can clean it up with some sandpaper, but I'm just going to go ahead and use my roto tool again and just going to sand it nice and smooth around. And now, with a little bit of acetone, we'll clean off the ink. And now, using the housing for the fuel dot, I'll just place this in here and I'll mark the locations for the drill holes. And I'll go ahead and drill these out. And you know, this is soft balsa. I could just use a pin vise, very, very soft wood, but I'm just going to go ahead and use my drill. And if you noticed, some of the monocoat has been pulled up in this process. So before I install it, I'm going to go back with my iron and I'm going to reattach the monocoat here. Boy, my iron was kind of dirty, had some red residue on it from some of the other monocoats. Got kind of dirty here, but luckily most of it was going to be covered up with the fuel dot itself. So, all right, well, since this back plate is made out of plywood, I want to pre-thread it and then reinforce the threads with, CA, which we do a lot. So I'm just going to go ahead and drive the little screw in, then pull it back out. That will sort of form the threads in the wood. And then I'll put the CA around inside there to reinforce those threads. And then also I'm going to put CA, thin CA, on the back and the wood back behind this to also reinforce it. Probably put a little bit up in here because again, this is soft balsa, so we're just going to reinforce it. And I'm not going to glue this in because I want to be able to take it out at some point, just in case, right? So that's what I'll do next. I'll go ahead and reinforce everything with CA. And now we'll go ahead and install our housing. Go. I'll just set the screws in partially. And now for the back plate. And there it is on the inside. And you can see I dinged my monocoat in the process, so when I get closer to the finish, I'll go over the entire plane with my iron and kind of work out all the little kinks and scratches and stuff. So this guy will pop in here like this. All right, so my next step is going to be to cut some lengths of my Tygon gas tubing and connect it to the tank itself. So I'm going to go ahead and cut some lengths a little bit longer than I need, and then I'm going to attach them out here, and then I'll put the tank in, and then we'll make the connections up here in the front. And I think I'm just going to use some good old spit to get this to slip over here. Okay, that one was easy because it's smaller. So my length is, I'm just going to estimate my length. This is going to go to my engine. I'm going to feed it through here. Give myself a little bit of extra so I can place it where I need to. Now I'll move on to the vent. Kind of gross, but seems to work. You can see how hard I'm pressed in this. So if you guys have any other tips related to this, let me know. But there's just no way I could have pushed it on with that much force with it being down inside of the fuselage like that. So there's my vent line. So again, the vent, as I mentioned, is going to come around. It's going to loop back and then come around sort of like this, and then go out to, I'm going to drill an exit hole for it. So it's going to come around like this. Looks like spaghetti. It's going to be in here, and then it's going to come out down here. So again, I'm just going to give myself a nice long piece to work with. A little bit wasteful, but that's what I have to do right now. I don't like wasting stuff, but that should be good like that. And the last piece we're going to have is going to be for our fuel dot, which is going to be easy. I think I've seen people heat this stuff up. They heat the tubing and then they put it on. I guess that'll work. Try that out maybe, but I'd be careful with that because you don't want to heat it too much and cause it to crack or have any other kind of problems. All right, there we go. Now those are on there very snug. Those are not going to come off. Again, this guy's going to be right in here, and it's going to have to come out to my fuel dot. Now I want enough length for the fuel dot. When I pull this out, I want to be able to pull it out far enough to where I can actually hook it up to my pump to fill up the gas tank. I don't want to leave a little piece hanging out. I want to have a couple of maybe 3 or 4 inches out so I have something to work with. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and attach my vent line. As I mentioned before, I'm going to loop it back, and then loop it back forward, just like this, like that. And for now, I'm just going to go ahead and use some good old electrical tape to sort of hold it in place. And remember, I have Velcro, which is going to hold the whole thing in. So I'm not too worried about it not being secure enough with the tubing. All right, well there we have it. We have the fuel tank installed, and here are my 3 lines. This is my vent line, which is going to be fed down. I'm going to probably put a hole down here in that bottom corner and have it come out there. This is the main line, which goes to the carburetor, and this is my fuel line, my filling line, which is going to go to the fuel dot. Everything is really secure, and I think it's going to be good like that. And now just to finish this off nicely, I'll put a little piece of monocoat over here. Put it down on top of this. Not that anybody's really going to see that, obviously, but it just cleans it up nicely, I think, and I just like doing it. And then last but certainly not least, I'm going to hook up the carburetor line. Pull this through here. It's a little tight getting it down inside there. May have to do this off camera because I'm going to have my fingers down here and you're probably not going to be able to see anything anyhow. Okay, well now the carburetor is hooked up, and like I said, I just couldn't get in there without blocking the view of the camera with my fingers and everything, so here it is. Okay, well there we have it. The fuel lines are all installed from the fuel tank to the front of the plane. I have my vent down there in the bottom left corner, and then I have my fuel dot installed over here on the right side of the plane, and then of course the line is feeding into the carburetor through the firewall right there. So everything looks pretty good, I think. Okay, so that's going to be about it for this video. The next step in the build is actually pretty simple, pretty small step. I'm just going to go ahead and finish up the canopy. I need to glue the canopy on here, and I have a pilot. I have a plastic pilot. I think this is from my revolver kit. Well, it's not a kit, it's an ARF. It's a Great Plains revolver. He fell out, so I'm just going to go ahead and put him in this one and have that finished. And then that's going to be about it until for the sort of all the building for the plane. And then the final few steps are going to be, I need to balance the plane, and I've held off on putting the electronics in, like the rest of the electronics, like the batteries and the electronic ignition, because all that stuff is, you know, that stuff has some weight to it, and I'm going to be moving that around hopefully to get the balance right. And that should be, you know, pretty straightforward. And then after that, I'll check the wing loading, and then I got to put the prop on and such, and then we'll do a test run with the engine on the ground, and after that we'll start getting ready for our maiden flight. So hopefully soon this will be finished. And like always, I really appreciate everybody who tagged along. You guys have been watching this for a long time. It's taken quite some time, but we're getting closer. So once again, I appreciate you watching my channel, and we'll see you next time.